Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to see everyone. I do want to preface and kick off because I do see some folks that know me. No, this isn't the new haircut. Alhamdulillah, as Brother Rami mentioned, I came back from Umrah, Alhamdulillah. So forgive me for the weak aesthetics, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us all to benefit and take some concrete, tangible strategies and ideas that we can immediately orchestrate and implement within our respective organizations. Um, Ramadan, as you guys know, if you're a masjid, is making up 70 to 80% of your annual operation. If you're a relief organization, it's making up a big chunk of that annual fund of that, strategic investment amount that you need to maintain and sustain your team. If you're an Islamic school, it's prime time to get visibility out there, especially for a lot of the Islamic schools that are at capacity or that are looking to make expansions. So very excited to kind of jump right into it. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but for those of you that want to ask questions, there is a Q&A feature. The team is going to kind of field those. And remember, as Rami said, after the Q&A session, there will be an exclusive offer. Very limited. I'll be very honest with you. I don't have a lot of capacity, but for a select few organizations that are interested, we'll be able to work with you pre-Ramadan to set you up for Ramadan success. With that being said, here's the agenda for today. We're going to focus on trends and forecast. We're going to talk about, hey, we're only a month out, right? So how much can we do and what is feasible within this time span? I'm going to share a quick checklist with you as an organization. What is it that we need to have? What are those things that we need to make sure that are set up in order for us to be set up for success? I'm going to highlight what not to do. Sometimes the best thing to do is to make sure you don't do the wrong thing. And then finally, some specific tips that will set you up for long-term success. Remember, Ramadan is a month, and similarly to how we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the year, we want to look at Ramadan as a kind of a marathon, if you will, and it's amplification of fundraising, but it should set us up for success in the months to follow as well. If we're just looking at Ramadan as 30 days, we're missing the bigger picture, right? Ramadan is an amplification of the rest of the year to come. And a lot of times we see that when we have a weak Ramadan, we end up having weak follow-up months as well. So inshallah, we're going to try to do our best to prevent that. I want to kick it off with a quick question from you guys, and that is, and feel free to use the chat feature here. What do you feel your organization is lacking going into this Ramadan fundraising season? Again, every Ramadan, we know Ramadan is going to come, but unfortunately, we feel like we have to start over every time Ramadan arrives. So, what are you guys seeing within your organization, respectively, that you're lacking? What do you feel like this is what's preventing me from getting to that next level, that next, $100,000, that next $10,000? So, if you don't mind, just share some thoughts in the chat. Um, and again, appreciate everybody who's participating, a clear plan. And what we'll do is we're going to come back to this, right? The hope is throughout this training today, you guys are going to see some things that'll hopefully help that specific thing that you feel like you're lacking. And then we can talk more about it in the QA as well, Q&A. Using strategies for fundraising other than one event, hype and funds because of the break. And we're going to talk about that, by the way, right? One of the things that is happening that we have no control on is year end and Ramadan are becoming one and the same, right? We used to have months of a gap, but now it's like, what do I do for year end without encroaching on my donors that are, usually giving big in Ramadan? And because of that time span, we're going to talk about some things that we can do. So again, drop those comments in the chat there, and inshallah, we'll come revisit that at the Q&A at the end. All right, Bismillah. So what are the trends and forecast items that we are seeing as an industry going into Ramadan 2026? What are those things that we need to take into account to ensure that we're preparing a strategy that's going to work? Now, if you as an organization, masjid, Islamic school, relief organization, civil rights advocacy, whatever it may be, if your Ramadan hasn't already started, at least from a mindset standpoint, you're already late. One of the biggest shifts we've seen post-COVID is Ramadan starts earlier and earlier. If you're waiting until Ramadan starts from a calendar standpoint, you've missed the window, you've missed the ship. And it's too late now because the time it's going to take for you to break the noise, compete against all the other organizations, get at the forefront of donors' minds to be an option for them to support you, you're just too late. So we're seeing a seasonal shift in the way donors start deciding where they're going to give their wealth. I don't know how many of you know this, but 74% of families have already pre-committed where they're going to give their zakat in Ramadan 2 weeks before Ramadan, right? This was a stat done by Giving Tuesday in collaboration with LaunchGood, where they asked families, when did you make that decision of where you're going to give your zakat? So if they're deciding 2 weeks before Ramadan and you're sending a zakat webinar, hosting a zakat webinar, or sending a mailer 1 week into Ramadan, you've already missed it. The second thing we're seeing is there's a continued growth in the digital giving, right? For those of you that think, hey, COVID days are done, I need to go back to in-person events, digital isn't working the same, I'm no longer getting a 5 or 6x ROI on my digital ads. Don't think that way because there is constant year after year growth in the digital landscape when it comes to fundraising, whether it's brand identity awareness, whether it's direct solicitation, whether it's joining recurring donor programs, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's very important from the lens of targeting a mass audience as well as new donor acquisition to be very visible and active in the digital landscape. The next trend we're seeing that we want to make sure we strategize with is increased donor expectation for transparency and impact reporting. One of the number one reasons why a donor gave last Ramadan but will not give to you this Ramadan is because of lack of impact reporting. If you came to me and told me, hey, Nadeem, I need you to give to my masjid so that we can do X, and now you haven't told me what you did with my money, and here you are coming again asking for money, that lack of impact connection, that's how you're going to lose donors. So, very important as an organization, and it's not too late, get those impact reports out there. Update donors who gave last year on what their investment has done for your organization and how it means something. Very, very important. A strong emphasis on zakat compliance. This is a common one. I know a lot of the relief organizations are pretty savvy with this, but if you have zakat eligibility, whether it's across the board or for specific projects, be very clear about that policy. Who is it endorsed by? What does that mean to your organization? What levels of that's stated in the Quran does your organization fall under when it comes to zakat funds, right? Being clear and transparent about your zakat policy is going to increase the level of giving of certain donors if they feel trust in that policy. And finally, and you guys are seeing this across the board, is AI and data-driven segmentation. If you guys are not leveraging AI to automate emails, to engage in email sequencing, to help you segment what is the likelihood of this individual to give more or less, what's the likelihood of this individual who gave last year to give 15% more this year, if you're not using those tools, it's a big missed opportunity. Remember, AI is not here to replace our staff, it's here to optimize it. It's here to increase efficiency so we can be more productive. What one staff member could do in a day, they can now do in an hour if they leverage the proper AI that's available. Now, shifting, as I mentioned, we're about a month out from Ramadan, right? So again, kind of late to the game, but not too late. And inshallah, through this webinar, as well as working with us proactively afterwards, there's still enough time to put a robust strategy to position ourselves for success. It's very important you have a clear, defined Ramadan plan, right? I personally love using the OKR model. What are my clear objectives and what are my tangible key results or my activities I'm going to do to achieve that objective, right? So having those defined goals amongst your leadership team, amongst your board, amongst your staff is extremely important. And remember, don't only have goals, but have realistic goals. If you raised $50,000 last year, don't raise $1 million this year. Be realistic, right? Look at the expectation. What has changed between last year and this year? Do you have more capacity? Do you have better leverage of your AI this year? Do you have more programs? Are you suddenly now zakat eligible and you have a proper endorsed policy that you think that's going to resonate with the larger audience? What has changed as an organization internally that then allows you to set those realistic goals? You know, a lot of times we set goals just from a gut and we don't hit the goals, we get depleted, we get demoralized, and it goes back to that not having clear Ramadan plans or goals. So very important to do that. Um, Not all Ramadan nights are equal. Very important. And by the way, sometimes we start making you know, expectations, or we make perceived notions that, hey, Muslims are going to give on the odd nights of Ramadan. Guess what? It depends what kind of organization you are. For some masajid, yes, that's true. For some Islamic schools, not so much. For relief organizations, we're seeing more and more zakat being given in the first 10 days of Ramadan than we ever have historically. So if you're waiting for the last 10 nights, guess what? A lot of people have already invested their donations, and now you're dealing with a smaller pool of money if you're waiting for those last 10 nights. So a lot of what we think we know, we need to forget and rely on the data to strategically guide us. That's very important. Content and asset creation, right? Remember, we're living in a time and place where storytelling is gold. People are no longer resonating with, we have 6% overhead fee. We are the only organization that's on the ground. We are the only Islamic school that is providing not only an environment, but the highest level of rigorous academics. Sure, these are all great, but a lot of people are making these claims. What people are connecting with are the stories, the impact. How is it that we're impacting society in a unique value proposition based way that's resonating, that's unique from others? Those stories are what's going to be a lead magnet for them to support your programs, right? And remember, just because you have stories, it also, you have to remember that you need to repurpose the stories based on the platform or the medium that you're using. Are you telling the story in a video? Is it on Facebook? Is it on Instagram? Is it a text? Is it a copy? Depending on the medium, that will dictate how you tell that story. Test donation forms and payment methods. Very important to test these things before Ramadan, right? I've worked with organizations that had a beautiful Ramadan landing page on their website, optimized for their focus. Day one of Ramadan, they weren't ready for the amount of traffic and the website crashed. Imagine starting Ramadan with your donors and you don't even have a working website to process a single transaction. The other mistake that's commonly made is not thinking mobile first. We have this, again, another misconception that elders in the community, who in some cases are our largest donors, don't give on their phone. They're not using technology. Well, guess what? Aunties and uncles are becoming hip and they're using technology. They're using Google Pay. They're saving their credit card on different platforms and websites on Safari and on Google. So you need to optimize always from a mobile-centric standpoint. Last year, looking at majority of the Muslim organizations in the US, over 70% of donations that were given online were given from the mobile platform. So if you're optimizing for how something looks from the website, from a desktop, you're missing the majority of the audience who are actually giving from their mobile. And finally, it's very important to have a backup plan, right? We can plan and plan and plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who controls the results of those plans. Similarly, as an organization, we need to have that backup plan, right? If this doesn't work out, how can we quickly shift to option two? If this campaign isn't resonating, if this story isn't clicking the way we thought it was, what is our backup plan, right? Having those redundancies in place from a storytelling standpoint, from a technology infrastructure standpoint, and a staffing standpoint is extremely important, right? We don't want to over rely on any one individual or any one campaign medium where if that fails or that's not available, our entire campaign collapses. So having those redundancy models in place is extremely valuable and important. So those are the things we want to keep out looking at 1 month out, inshallah. All right. Now here's a checklist. Now, these are very important. And again, this is catered to any Muslim, non-Muslim, for-profit, non-profit, looking to raise funds in the month of Ramadan. I don't want you guys to say, hey, this is for this type of org that doesn't apply to us. No, this is universal across the board, right? Number one is donation pages optimized. If your team has the capacity to have dedicated landing pages that are unique to Ramadan, do it. You want to make the UX, you want to make the user experience as seamless and clear as possible. When you send someone to your website and your website is talking about here's how you can join, here's how you can become a volunteer, here's our Ramadan campaign, here's how you can save the world, there's a lot going on. In Ramadan, your goal is one thing, that's conversion. You're trying to get them to give you a donation because we know in Ramadan, donors give more. So if that's the case, dedicated landing pages that are focused with a clear ask is one of the best ways to break through that noise and not confuse and lose donors. We've done thousands of hours of testing where we watch donors interact with different websites, with different landing pages, whether it's on your organic site from your, organization or you're using a third-party platform. And the second we see one level of distraction, the percentage of donors who give and don't give drops by over 50%. Right. Now, I'm going to take a jab against a lot of the third-party platforms out there for crowdfunding. Why is it that sometimes the conversion on third-party crowdfunding platforms is less? Is because when a donor gets sent there, they get distracted by other things, right? When you go to a third-party crowdfunding platform, they don't just see your organization, they see other organizations, right? So the same concept applies to your website. Don't, confuse them with having multiple asks. The other thing is automate receipts and tax acknowledgments. Why wait for after Ramadan to have 1,000 receipts to send out? Automate that as you go. Remember, Ramadan is the 1 month in the calendar year in which donors frequently give a minimum of 3.4 times, right? I'm going to repeat that one more time. Donors in Ramadan don't give once. So if you give once early in week one and I get a nice tax receipt, I get a thank you recognition, I see my money being used in an impactful way, guess what? That's going to increase the likelihood of me giving a second time or maybe a third time, right? So very important to automate things like receipts in Ramadan so the donors see you're proactive about it. Remember, donors give because they like the impact, they like the cause. But another reason why donors give is because of the professionalism, because of the customer service, because of the added layer of transparency. Another thing on the checklist is very, very important to take advantage of nightly giving or recurring giving options. Now, there are a lot of platforms out there, right? You may be saying, Nadeem, my website is, out of whack right now. I got some work to do there. There's no way I can create a widget that's going to automate daily giving. I don't even know where to start. Well, guess what? There are third-party platforms available. You can integrate those to your website and set up automated giving. Ramadan and Dhul Hijjah, statistically, according to the data, are the 2 months in which Muslims are most likely to set up automated giving, right? You can do it for all 30 days. You can do it for the last 10 nights. You can do it for the odd nights in the last 10 nights. And with the messaging that don't let the night of power be missed, automate your giving by supporting your local mosque, your local Islamic school, or your local organization. Very important to set these things up. Remember, not everyone has thousands of dollars to give in Ramadan, but everyone wants to give something. So I want you guys to look at this automated giving model as two value adds. Number one, it's great for new donor acquisition because the entry point is lower, $10 a day, $15 a day, $30 a day. And number two, it's a data grab, right? Even though you may be only getting a couple $100 from them over the month of Ramadan, guess what? That email is worth thousands of dollars when properly cultivated and stewarded upon. Next is, again, we talked about the storytelling assets. Don't wait too close to Ramadan to create these assets. Remember, one of the most commonly used strategies or tactics within the digital space is A/B testing. You don't know how something is going to work or the response to it until you test it out in the market. So the best way the best way to do that is by testing things pre-Ramadan, looking at the results, the viewership, and then focusing on that which has the highest results in the month of Ramadan. One thing I always tell organizations to do, and the only way to be dynamic, is have live dashboards and daily tracking. Track how much money you're raising on a daily base, right? This will allow you to see trends. This will allow you to see, hey, guess what? I didn't realize this, but Thursdays is actually a really good profitable day for us. We get a lot of donations. Whereas statistically, I thought Jummah would be better. Or I might say, guess what? When I post videos after 6 p.m., I see an influx in donations coming in after Isha. So when you have dashboards that are dynamically tracking fundraising and daily data, you're able to make strategic decisions that work with the data. And then finally, don't wait for after Ramadan to put together your post-Ramadan stewardship plan. How are you going to thank donors who gave in Ramadan? How are you going to get those tax receipts out there? How are you going to make sure every single email, phone number, and first and last name that's collected at Jummah tables, at outreach, in email inboxes, how is that going to get integrated into my CRM? Make sure all of that is finalized and planned for pre-Ramadan, inshallah. Because remember, post-Ramadan, there is a null, there is a little time period where donors kind of go, hide in their cave because you've already squeezed them and pulled all the money out of them. But at the same time, it's one of the best opportunities to steward general cultivation by thanking them and acknowledging their gifts that they gave in Ramadan. All right. So again, one of the best ways to do good is to know what not to do. And I tried to pick things that I feel like people do frequently to make sure as an organization you guys don't do this and position yourself for increased success, right? Remember, the goal is year over year growth. Every year, if you're not growing from Ramadan to Ramadan, something's not working. It doesn't mean you need to grow 30% every year, but there should be some level of, growth, capacity building when it comes to what you're able to accomplish from a volume standpoint so that your organization is sustainable. So the first thing is waiting for Ramadan to launch the campaign. We already talked about that. You guys are on this call about 30 days out. So I think, alhamdulillah, all of you understand the importance of pre-planning for Ramadan. Secondly, overloading donors with too many asks and not enough impact, right? Going back to that user experience. If you have 17 different projects on your website and you're expecting donors to kind of pick what they want to support, a donor is going to leave and go somewhere else that's more simple in their ask. Make sure you're not confusing donors with too many asks, right? I tell organizations this all the time. It's beautiful that you're able to provide relief in 27 different countries, but have a core focus, right? Some organizations, they have three focuses and they focus them on them and they break Ramadan into a third. The first 10 days, they focus on this, second 10 days, and last 10 days. That's one model you can use. Or they may mention a couple things, but then they say this Ramadan, we're focusing on X. And here's why it means something to us within the context of today, this Ramadan, right? When you can show urgency, when you can show a level of this is relevant now, today, donors are going to navigate towards something like that versus something that's more generic, like that. So very, very important. And I'll give you an example for masajids, right? If you're a masjid, right? Donors don't want to hear about your operational budget expense. I know a lot of masajids love to say, hey, who wants to cover the water bill? Who wants to take care of the electricity? It's become old now, right? Identify what is unique about your masjid. Do you have a hifth program that's pushing out 30 new hufad every year? Do you have an expansion project because your masjid is at capacity? Does your masjid have an attached Islamic school that's trying to provide middle school and high school in an area that Islamic schools are not available? Whatever is that unique value proposition as a masjid, focus on that project in your Ramadan campaign, right? Stand out from what others are doing. So I want to make that very clear. And whether you're an Islamic school, you're a mosque, you're, another type of organization, we all have a unique value add that we can focus on within the month of Ramadan. I do want to preface by saying you're not restricting yourself. Remember, this doesn't say now, oh, all my money has to go to this exact small project. You're using it as a case of support for general fundraising, but that story resonates because it shows what specifically you're trying to do. The other thing is you want to make sure you don't ignore mobile optimization. We talked about that a little bit. You want to make sure you don't have unclear zakah, edibility messaging, right, or eligibility. You want to make sure that um, you're very clear and precise when it comes to zakah, right? As Muslims should be, they're very intentional about where they give their zakah. So if you have specific projects that are zakah eligible exclusively, make that very clear to your donors. And remember, target that to your donors before Ramadan. If you're doing it in Ramadan, you're too late. One size fits all communication, right? We live in an era of segmentation. If you're talking to all donors with the same language, with the same emails, with the same copy, you're missing out, right? Not all donors are equal. Not all donors are communicated to the same way. Donors are of different age groups. You need to make sure you have communication buckets and segmentations established depending on who you're talking to. Very, very important, right? And the data and the AI will allow you to do that in a way where it's not all manual work. Another mistake you don't want to make is no follow-up after Eid, right? Again, I cannot emphasize how many donors I've spoken to who don't give again because they feel like they were respected up until the gift was given. Once the money was given, they no longer existed. No thank you, no recognition, no update on the impact. They just got ghosted thereafter. So don't do that. Remember, it's more expensive for new donor acquisition than donor retention. So just like we want new donors, we need to equally invest the same amount of effort in retaining our existing donors, right? Otherwise, it becomes very expensive to acquire new donors. And finally, the last mistake you want to make sure you're not making is underestimating team burnout and capacity. What ends up happening in Ramadan is our staff, our team experience burnout, right? They're going to the masjid every single night. They're going to the community every single day. You have one or two people making 195 calls per day, right? The best way to prevent burnout is to have a strategic plan, right? Engage volunteers before Ramadan so you can leverage them during Ramadan. Having, redundancy models in place, right? Forecasting that what if someone gets sick? If I have one khatib or one person giving masjid appeals and I have them booked for 22 nights, what happens if they're not available one night, right? Having plans in play, breaking up the roles and responsibilities is extremely important to prevent burnout. And now on the other side of it, I will also say it's a mindset. We also have to understand as an organization that Ramadan is a race, right? It's not a marathon, right? It is fast. There is a lot going on. Every day of Ramadan is equal to 25 days outside of Ramadan. So it is part of it is also mentally being prepared that it is going to be a challenge, right? And that's part of kind of some of the blessings of Ramadan, right? We want to accomplish so much. We're fasting, we're fragile for some of those days, but having that mindset that what we can accomplish in these 29 days will inshallah set us up for more ease in the 11 months to follow. All right, now shifting to what are those tips that can set up our organization for success, right? Kind of summarizing those mistakes. What are those strategies? What data points do we want to look at? Number one is start early and finish strong. All campaigns that you execute as an organization, as a mosque, as an Islamic school, you need to plan 60 to 90 days out. Make that a habit. If you're not doing that, you're not able to maximize on all the different ways that you can fundraise or increase your sustainable giving. Very, very important. Similar for Ramadan. Your planning for Ramadan should have started at the beginning of November. Only then are you going to be able to do everything you need to do to position yourself to take into account all the mediums, right? Remember, when you have a plan in place and then current events happen, different things happen in the community, you can easily shift those dynamically into your plan because you already have your foundation established. But if your foundation and plan is still being planned and you're a couple weeks out, it's harder to then integrate, last minute changes or variables because you're still planning, from the initial plan. The second thing is simplified giving, right? I cannot emphasize enough. If you're as an organization outside of Ramadan are not asking your donors for feedback, if you're not testing what's working on your website, if you're not looking, leveraging the data and talking to people how they interact with your product or your organization or your center or your school, you're missing out in Ramadan. A lot of organizations rely on what they think works, but in reality, we don't go to the source, right? If we go to donors for money, why don't we also go to donors for and test what's working, what's resonating? We made a landing page that was dedicated for Ramadan. How did you like that versus the years in the past, right? This year we sent a mailer to you. Last year we didn't. What percentage of donors actually use the mailer? Some organizations spend thousands of dollars to send out mailers. Working with a mosque right now, and they have no idea if anybody even gave via the mailer because they're not tracking, right? Which reminds me, one of the best ways to ensure proper UX is use trackable codes. When you send a mailer, make sure there's a unique QR code so you know how much money came in from that mailer. When you send a certain khatib to give an appeal on behalf of your masjid, make sure that that khatib has a trackable link so you know how much money that khatib is bringing. Remember, data is money, but if you're not tracking the results of the data, you're going in blind. The next thing is leading with impact. So again, show the outcomes, not just the needs. If you're constantly just saying, we're going to shut down as a masjid if we don't get your money, we're going to have to deny students as an Islamic school if you don't support our expansion. We're not going to be able to give the aid that's needed to Sudan if you don't help us get $1 million in these first 10 days of Ramadan. Remember, donors are hearing that quite a bit. So, yes, we want to highlight our needs. We want to show why capacity is a necessity, but focus on the outcomes. Another thing I want to share with everyone is we're seeing a shift in the narrative of the way we ask for money. We no longer want to doom and gloom our donors, right? Showing people that are in need, asking for money, showing masjids that have their doors closed because they weren't able to raise the amount of money, seeing kids being forced to go to public school because there's no capacity at the Islamic schools. People want to build their gifts, their donations on positivity, on optimism, on hope. So make sure that narrative is reflective within your branding, within your messaging as an organization. Very, very important that the outcomes are clear in a positive light. We also want to leverage key nights strategically. Again, we talked about that. Look at your last 3 years of Ramadan data and see what nights you raised the most money on. See which nights were random, right? Maybe strategically, you looking at the data, your organization raises a lot of money the first 10 days of Ramadan. Whereas some Islamic centers will tell you, no, we raise most of our money the last 10 nights. Don't just trust the myths that are out there. Look at your own specific data. I can tell you this, working with different masajids across the US, no two masjids have a similar fundraising cycle. I know some mosques that raise majority of their money in the second half of Ramadan. And I know some masajids that raise majority of it in the last middle part of Ramadan, days 12 through 17. And if you were to just ask me from a data standpoint, I'd say, not sure of the logic there, but that's what the data is showing. So every community is unique. Look at your own specific data and don't just follow a trend because that's what's working in another center. And then finally, remember, Ramadan is part of the rest of the year. This year, Ramadan is coming in February, right? SubhanAllah, it's very early in the year. We have another 10 months to go after this. So very important that when you structure and plan your Ramadan, it's with the intention of turning these donors into lifelong supporters. Remember the S word in fundraising, don't worry, I'm not going to say a bad word, is sustainability. People want to invest in organizations that show sustainability. I don't want to invest in something that's here this Ramadan and then is no longer there next Ramadan. People are thinking sadaqah jariyah. They're thinking long-term investment. So if you can create that brand recognition with your organization, you're not only going to get a Ramadan donor, you're going to get a lifelong supporter, right? With the proper stewardship and cultivation. So very, very important that your organization does these things from a strategy standpoint. I'm going to stop there for a second. Again, you know, I want to emphasize that it's not too late to put a Ramadan plan together that is not only robust, that is strategic, that leverages data, but at the same time, you need to be very intentional with what those goals are. So you guys should be having these conversations as an organization that we can then apply, actual tangible campaign strategies to, inshallah, to make this Ramadan a success. One last thing I'll say before I turn it over to the Q&A is we are trending to see this Ramadan out fundraise last Ramadan. Now, you guys are probably saying, well, where are you getting that data from? A lot of data about how much fundraising comes in Ramadan is dependent on emergencies that happen pre-Ramadan. So I'm not saying, that there's not going to be an emergency, but right now with the way we're seeing the giving trends and we're also looking at year-end campaigns, by the way, year-end campaigns saw a 21% decline. And one of the reasons we're seeing that is because of the distance between year-end in Ramadan and people and their zakat giving. So when we see a decline in year-end giving, that usually correlates to more giving within the month of Ramadan. So again, if data holds true, and we're looking at 4 or 5 years of data since COVID, we're inshallah going to see a Ramadan that is on the higher end of things. So with that being said, we can turn over to a little bit of Q&A, and I'll have Brother Rami kind of help me coordinate this a little bit.